This is the Politics of Everything, and I'm your host, Amber Daines. Welcome to the podcast where we want to discuss the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment to equality, and much more. Our guests are experts in their field or topic of choice, even if you've not yet heard their name. This is a bipartisan podcast, so while we love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate, by no means is this a one-sided forum for any one political view. So please listen up and enjoy the politics of everything. We're learning more about the links between gut health and chronic conditions such as acne, irritable bowel syndrome, and even cognitive function. As someone who has personally experienced gut disorders and skin conditions for many years myself, I'm always keen to educate how I can improve my well-being and not just pop some pills, especially when it comes to the all-important gut. Very much excited to speak to Rebecca Coomes today. She's an author, a presenter, and coach who spent most of her life feeling sick, but has found a way to heal her gut and is here to share her pearls of wisdom today. Rebecca is the author of the world's first SIBO cookbook, SIBO Summer Cookbook, and SIBO Family Favourites Cookbook, and is the host of the SIBO Cooking Show, and we'll discuss more about SIBO soon. She also has a fortnightly podcast called The Healthy Gut, which discusses all aspects of gut health, with particular focus on small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that is SIBO. I'm delighted to have her on the show today to learn more about the politics of gut health. Welcome.
Thanks, Amber. It's great to be on the show.
So you were born 2 months premature, and you say that your immune system, you believe, was compromised very early on. And it sounds like you developed multiple food intolerances quite early in your life, and by your 20s had sort of autoimmune disease and a genetic disorder by your mid-30s. Give us a little background about the kinds of problems you had and how that sort of impacted your daily life.
Well, they know now that the way a child is born has a significant impact on the future health of that person. Luckily, I was born vaginally because the birth canal provides that first wash of bacteria into the baby through eyes, mouth, nose. It's quite delightful when you think about it. And that then gets reinforced by breast milk. But unfortunately, being 2 months prem, my mum was very sick. We both nearly died. I was not breastfed, and I was put on formula, and I was very sick. So I was pumped full of antibiotics. So the organisms, whatever I had picked up in the birth canal, the poor little things were decimated through not being supported and fed through breast milk, and then being wiped out through antibiotics. And what occurred for in my early days was I was a sick kid. Any cold or flu or virus or, weird illness that was doing the rounds, I got it. But I got it to the worst degree. So I was constantly being assessed by doctors who were saying, should we document this version of this illness? This is the worst I've ever seen. This
specimen almost.
This could go into medical literature. And, our medical system is amazing. It's great for acute care when you are very sick, but unfortunately, so often the standard response is have some antibiotics. And so my whole childhood was spent just going from one course of antibiotics to the next course of antibiotics. They didn't know back in those days, like they do now, the importance of a diverse range of bacteria in your gut and how to eat for it. So I was eating the very typical Australian and Western diet of high carbohydrate food, so white bread, pasta, rice, very low fat because we were indoctrinated in that low-fat movement. My grandfather had
I remember that. It was high sugar too, though, wasn't it? I still remember all that horrible food that we ate as kids.
My granddad had several heart attacks, so we were all, we must not eat meat and fat because that just causes heart attacks, which they now know is not the case. It's actually sugar and high carbohydrate diets that are being linked to cardiovascular disease. So we were doing everything that we thought was correct, but in fact it was wrong for our health. And it started off with me just feeling sick. I remember saying to Mum as a kid, "Mummy, I feel really yucky." And she'd say, "What do you mean by yucky?" And I'd say, "My tummy hurts. I just feel yucky." And I couldn't pinpoint it because I was young and I guess I didn't have the experience of life or really connection with my body. But what I did know is that I never went to the toilet to do a poo. I would go maybe once or twice a week. But if things got longer than that, I would treat by having dairy, because I knew dairy would give me diarrhea. So I'd literally go to the fridge, grab a piece of cheese, eat it walking to the toilet because I'd get diarrhea that quickly, have a huge evacuation, and then I'd think, okay, well, that solved that problem for the next week or two, and then I'd get about my business. And that's what I thought was normal, that all kids did that. And as I got older, I became more sensitive to food. So gluten-based products made me feel absolutely exhausted. I would have huge highs and lows with my energy when I ate them. I was constantly bloated, but I didn't know I was constantly bloated because, again, I'd had it my whole life. Constipation was a very big problem for me, but again, that was my normal, so I thought that's how everybody was, interspersed with bouts of diarrhea, which I now know often occur when the gut is so impacted that the body will flood it with water to try and release some of this waste material that's just completely impacted in there. And like you said in the intro, as I got older, I developed an autoimmune condition, endometriosis, which is a very clear sign that my immune system was just not coping. It was completely overactive and it was starting to attack itself. And for me, it was attacking my endometrial lining. So I was having severe period pain, very heavy periods, absolutely miserable time every week, very bad PMS. And then by my mid-30s, I'd been diagnosed with hemochromatosis, which is a genetic condition which turned on in me, whereby my body thought that it didn't have enough iron, so it was storing too much iron from my food. And that was a sign, again, that my gut, the inflammation in my system and my immune system was just overactive. It was just, under siege.
It had 30 odd years of it. It had enough by the sounds of it, which is not surprising. Look, how did you actually discover it was your gut? Because it sounds like, like a lot of us, you go to the doctor, you might get some blood tests, you might get told you have IBS and, just to kind of, take some tablets if you need it or avoid certain foods. Well, how did that gut link really kind of have that light bulb moment for you where you went, okay, this is the key to tackling all my health issues? Because it sounds like you had multiple things happening at once.
I did, and it took me years to discover it was my gut. It started out with, I had a wonderful specialist in the UK when I lived there who was my endometriosis specialist, and she was the first person to introduce me to the connection between what I was eating and how I was feeling. And this is back in the early 2000s, and she said to me, look, I don't know why, but I know my ladies do particularly well when they eliminate gluten and dairy from their diet. I know that triggers their endo symptoms. So I cut that food out and was almost immediately transformed in how I felt. But then over the coming years, my symptoms regressed and I started to feel pretty ordinary again. And so I would say that for 10 years, I was actively looking for answers, and I'd go to my GP both in the UK and then Australia when I returned to live here, and I would have multiple blood tests run. They'd all come back to show that I was in absolutely perfect health. Sometimes doctors would say, I've never seen a healthier specimen than what you're presenting with. And because they couldn't diagnose it, sometimes I was told you've got irritable bowel syndrome. There's nothing you can do about it. Diet won't help it. Just live with it. Or other times I was told it's all in your head. And it got to a point where one night I was on good old Dr. Google and I was feeling really frustrated, really unwell, and starting to really question whether I wanted to continue with life if that's how it was going to be. I was sick of looking pregnant. I'd had strangers come up and pat my belly on the street and ask when the baby was due, and I wasn't pregnant. I was just severely bloated. I felt absolutely miserable and depressed and just like, this shouldn't be how life is. And I was Googling, why do you get bloated, and what does stomach cramps mean? And obviously I'm reading it could be cancer, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Oh, I know. That's pretty dangerous, especially if it's like the middle of the night and you kind of like, wow, this is the end for me.
And I found this woman's name kept appearing, this naturopath in Melbourne, and I looked her up and she was really close to where I was working at the time, and I thought, my gosh, I could go and see her. And so I booked an appointment, walked into her clinic, sat down, burst into tears, and she said, how can I help you? And I said, I don't know. I don't even know what's wrong wrong with me. No one can tell me what's wrong with me. You're really my last straw. But I'm really hoping you can help me get back to feeling good. I feel so crap. And lucky for me really was the universe directing me to her. She is a specialist in gut health and a particular condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And she said, I think I know what you've got. And if you do have it, it's very easy to diagnose and I know how to treat it. But most importantly, she said to me, I believe you when you say you're sick. And she was the first person in all of those years that had said that they believed in me. And the power of knowing that someone who had some, training and knew what they were doing to say, no, Rebecca, you're not mad. I believe you. That in itself was transformative because I then felt that I could do something about it rather than being told it was all in my head. So that really was, I see, as almost a sliding doors moment, and life really changed significantly from that day forward.
Wow, that does sound amazing. And I can imagine that journey you've been on and that relief of, okay, I can help you and this is how you do it. So what exactly is SIBO? I mean, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, it doesn't sound like an exciting, glamorous condition to have. How do you actually know that you have it versus all the other things you were diagnosed with, such as IBS and other issues?
Well, SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is the biggest underlying cause of irritable bowel syndrome. So IBS is basically this kind of catch-all diagnosis when they don't know what's wrong with you. It's actually not a diagnosis. It's just a doctor saying, yeah, we recognize that you're telling us you've got a disrupted digestive system, but we can't tell you what. It's not celiac disease or it's not food intolerance. So we'll call it IBS. When they've done studies, up to 84% of people that have been told by a doctor they've got IBS will actually have SIBO. So SIBO in and of itself is actually, it's very common, but not very well known at this point in time, although awareness is growing about it. We are full of bacteria, which really grossed me out back in the day. And our intestinal system is pretty amazing in that it has these kind of compartments where each section does a certain thing. And our large intestine, the very end part of the intestinal system, is full of trillions of bacteria. And their job is to break down the last of the food so that we can absorb the final bits of nutrients. But what can happen when someone has SIBO is that that bacteria can end up living in the small intestine. And the small intestine isn't supposed to have a lot of bacteria. It has a little bit, but nowhere near as much bacteria as the large intestine. And so when it sets up home there, I like to think of it as like a squatter that's found this palatial mansion. And the bacteria are like, hey guys, it's amazing here. Let's party. Because they're getting this food further up the chain and it's less digested, and the bacteria are having a wonderful time and they're eating their food, they're fermenting it, and they're creating gas, which is what is causing all of these problems. And so the common symptoms of SIBO are abdominal pain, bloating, constipation or diarrhea, or swinging between the two, which is what I often did. Food sensitivities, particularly when someone says, I used to be able to eat anything I wanted and these days I can't have blah, 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 a whole list of foods. Producing gas both up and down. And if you've got really smelly gas, that's often a sign of a particular type of overgrowth in your small intestine. If it smells like rotten eggs, that can be a really good indicator that you've got a particular overgrowth. And also feeling quite nauseous, like I used to feel quite nauseous. But then there's other symptoms that go along with it where you can feel quite foggy in your brain. It can feel like your brain just doesn't work very well. You can feel quite fatigued. You might feel anxious or have moments of depression. It can also show up on your skin. So if you have eczema or psoriasis or acne or hives, that's often a very good indicator that you might have SIBO. It's not a guaranteed, but They know that skin disturbances and the gut are very closely interlinked. And then also deficiencies in things like iron and B12, particularly for those two things, the SIBO or the bacteria often consume iron and B12 before we can get it, which is why we're often really deficient in those things. And then classic things like heartburn or acid reflux, and even joint and muscular pain can also be symptoms of SIBO. So it's really easy to test for SIBO. You take a breath test. You can do it at home, or some doctors offer it in clinic, and you drink a sugar solution. And why you drink a sugar solution is that the bacteria can consume that very easily, and they then create the gas that you can then test by it. You expirate it through your lungs, and then they capture it in a breath test. It's very non-invasive. It's the most commonly used test these days to test for SIBO. And then they will be able to say, yes, you have presence of this gas, which indicates you've got an overgrowth, or no, you don't. We can rule SIBO out, and let's continue to look at why you're having these symptoms. But the key thing is that we're not supposed to have those symptoms. So if you're listening to this podcast and you think, I have some of them, that's a sign that something is not working correctly in your intestinal system, and it is worth investigating what's causing it. Because when you leave it like I did, inadvertently, I didn't know this was problematic. But I was 36 when I finally discovered I had SIBO. So I would say I had SIBO from a very young age. I had all of those years of that damage occurring. So to heal, it's taking me a lot longer than, say, someone that's only had it for 6 months. So time is of the essence.
Time's of the essence, and why would you want to live like that as well if you can diagnose it? And it sounds like it's very treatable once you know that you actually have SIBO, which I think is the key for this particular podcast. Yeah. So your qualifications to educate others about SIBO, how did you actually go on this journey? I mean, it's one thing to know this is what I've got, this is how I deal with it, but how did you then get to the point where you're like, this is what I want to be doing to help others, and sort of what sort of background did you have to actually be able to do that?
Well, I'm a marketer by trade, so I don't have any medical qualifications, and I don't medically treat people. But what I did was, as I went through my journey, my first question for my naturopath was, after telling me I had to go on a very restricted diet, I said, well, where are the recipes? And she said, well, there really aren't any for SIBO. And I'm a passionate cook, so I set about writing 3 cookbooks in the space of 12 months, and they're still the world's only dedicated books for the SIBO diet, which is, great to be able to help people. And as soon as my books were out, I had people from all around the world contacting me saying, can you help me, and how did you get through it? And I realised that whilst I wasn't able to provide medical treatment, I could provide lifestyle and emotional support. SIBO is a very isolating condition. You can't see it. It's not like a broken limb where you can see there's an injury. And because these symptoms can often be quite debilitating and people often get quite restricted in how they live, they can feel like they're completely alone and isolated. And that's how I felt. And I didn't want anybody to feel like that anymore. So after much deliberation, I launched a SIBO coaching program where I provide people with the practical lifestyle support and emotional support on living with what is often a very chronic illness. Very unfortunately, at this point in time, because we're still learning so much about the gut, 2/3 of SIBO patients relapse, which means that they're dealing with this as a chronic condition. They're not being treated and then never having it again. And that can make it very difficult. So I now provide that support, and I work very closely with the medical practitioners and dietitians and nutritionists who provide that medical expertise and treatment, and then I provide the lifestyle aspect of it. But I've got to say, it was really hard for me to get to that point because I had a lot of self-doubt. I was like, who am I to help people? I'm just some chick from Australia who managed to return her health around. Why would people want to have me coach them? But now I've coached many people, and I've really been able to support them to regain their health by introducing them to the right doctors, helping them with their mindset, their lifestyle support, and really seeing some wonderful improvements in people that have been sick for 10, 20, 30 years.
Absolutely life-changing stuff once you sort of know what to do, isn't it? So with the 5-step system that you have created, without sort of going into all the detail of it, you mentioned that you do work with other health and wellness experts to make sure that it's the right advice and guiding people on the right path. How has this system kind of evolved? Are you finding new information out as you go, or is it something that once you know what to do, there is that kind of, you stick to this diet, you avoid this kind of food, or you change certain things in your lifestyle and you will be better?
Well, my 5 key pillars, the way in which I set them up it can be tailored to however a person needs them. And I'll just very quickly touch on them so that listeners understand, but I won't go into huge detail. And I based it on my own journey, realizing that, there was so much more to regaining my health than just taking a few pills. So the step 1 is awareness, and that's becoming aware of your body, aware of your condition, aware of how you're feeling. And it really is a critical first step because so many of us have stopped listening to our bodies. We've just dulled down every symptom that we get by taking painkillers or antidepressant medication or whatever it is. And our bodies tell us very, very clearly what's going on if we choose to listen. And the second step is nutrition. Yes, on a SIBO program, most people will have to modify their diet so that you restrict certain foods for a period of time so that you can alleviate some of those painful symptoms. And then you reintroduce food. But really understanding the quality of nutrition is important. There's good food and perhaps not such good food for us to eat, and it's making a decision on what you want to fuel your body with. It's like having a Ferrari and then putting the cheapest gas in it, and why would you do that? And the third step is movement. For many of us, we're not moving correctly for our body. Now that may mean that we're very sedentary, we're stuck behind a desk for 8 hours a day. Or, as I've seen with my coaching clients, so many of us are type A personalities. We're overly driven and we often push ourselves to the extremes. And there's many people out there that do CrossFit and triathlons and are training 5 to 7 days a week. And sometimes we actually need to pull back on our exercise or modify it so that we can give our body a chance to heal. The fourth step is around mindset, because particularly when you've been chronically unwell, what you think is what you become. And if you're thinking and feeling quite negative about your situation, it can be very difficult to move towards a more positive outcome. And the fifth step, which was a really big piece for me, is around the lifestyle management. I was notoriously up very late at night, so I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was hanging out with people that really liked to drink a lot, to party, so I wasn't supporting my body to recover. I had a lot of stress in my life. I was in sort of very stressful corporate marketing jobs, often with bosses that weren't particularly nice to me. So I had to do this whole reassessment of the peripheral things going on in my life to see whether they were helping or hindering me to heal. And why the 5 key pillars to health work well for people is that, my clients may find that they're doing well on one of the 5 pillars, but there's one area that they feel that they're really struggling with. And it also evolves over time. So when you first get diagnosed with SIBO, the awareness piece is a really critical piece. But say 6 months into your treatment, awareness then becomes different for you. So it might be that you don't have to learn about your condition anymore, but it might be about learning what is underlying the condition to have arisen in the first place. So they modify and evolve as you go through your journey. And it's really great to watch my clients really take those 5 key pillars and continue to work with them as their health improves.
They sound all important, and like you say, it's getting that balance right. We know there's a strong connection between gut flora and the brain, and I'm really fascinated by this kind of aspect of it too, because I think it's very easy to sometimes focus on the physical side of things. But I know in the US, a few years ago, the US National Institute of Mental Health spent more than $1 million on a research program to study this relationship specifically. And, you know, those sort of neurological changes that can happen and might manifest itself in the things that you described as well, like anxiety, depression, you know, maybe Alzheimer's later in life, have been attributed to lack of certain elements in the neurotransmitters that, you know, are taking place when the gut health isn't working well. Have you devoted much of your practice to this link as well? Are we coming to understand a little bit more about that brain and gut health connection, and what do you understand by it so far?
I think it's really exciting, and I can't wait to see where research goes with this. We're still in such an infancy stage of our awareness around the gut. What's really interesting is we've only mapped about 40% of the organisms that live within our gut. So we've got more to go. We've only, you know, we're not even halfway there yet, which, you know, what are we going to know when we've mapped the rest of it? It's really like the deep blue sea inside of us. Given that I don't medically treat my clients, then, you know, it's not like I'm out there prescribing any supplements, and they will work with their practitioner around this. But it is important for people to be improving the health and diversity in their gut. And something that many of my clients do with their practitioners is that they'll do a stool analysis to determine, well, what is actually living within them. And that can often show up that they're missing entire categories of microbiome that is known to support better health, for instance. And I think it's really important that people are working with a medical practitioner that has expertise or training or knowledge in this area so that they can be getting the right treatment. One thing I would caution listeners about is, you know, things become very popular. And some of the things that are really popular at the moment are probiotics. And people are talking about having probiotics and go down and buy a good probiotic from your local health food store or pharmacy. Now, we need to know what's actually within us to be able to know whether we're having the right probiotic. And for many people with SIBO, taking probiotics before they've addressed the SIBO can actually make their symptoms worse because you're just adding in more bacteria when you've already got an overgrowth of bacteria. So, you know, don't read what's on popular news sites or blogs or what you're seeing in the news and think, I can do that without...
all the marketing hype. You know, you walk through a chemist or you see a certain brand and it's like, oh, this will help your gut. And if you've got, you know, you're paying attention to your gut because you've got problems with it, you'll go, this is it. This is the silver bullet. And like you say, everything has to be maybe determined before you go down that path. That's really good advice, because I have often thought, oh, is it just about probiotics? And even I've got 2 children and, you know, there's all kids probiotics now and, you know, feeding into the mother guilt that we have enough of already, that we need to be giving our kids more of the good stuff. So yeah. I think adults can also get sucked into that. So that's a really good cautionary tale perhaps about, you know, why you need to see a practitioner before you start self-medicating, even with things that seem to be quite harmless. And if anything, you know, what difference will it make if I don't take it versus do I take it?
Exactly.
And then kind of spending a lot of money as well on things that you might not need, which I think is one of my bugbears.
Yeah, and you don't need to have this huge supplement cupboard. Our microbiota, which is the whole range of microorganisms that live within us, respond really well to food, real natural food. So if you want to give your gut the best helping hand you can, don't go and spend a whole bunch of money on supplements, because at the end of the day, you're just helping marketers to achieve their budgets. And I, as an ex-marketer, I know why they do that. But go and eat natural food, eat it in its original source, go for organic wherever possible, because if you're eating food that's full of pesticides and herbicides and chemicals, then that's having a very profound impact on the health of your organisms within you. Eat real quality meats, get a good amount of fat in your diet, eat nuts and seeds, eat like we were designed to eat. They now know, it's amazing, you know, some of the studies coming through that they can see even just a week of eating processed food, and that could even be just jars of sauces or, you know, frozen meals. It doesn't have to be going out and eating McDonald's every day. That can decimate the healthy populations in your gut. So, the very first step is eat real food, high quality food, and that will help support your gut enormously. And then work with a practitioner to determine, okay, well, what is going on inside of you? And do I have enough of these beneficial groups of bacteria, or do I need to support them? And I can see where we are going with our healthcare is that in the future we will have this incredible sort of system whereby you'll have the microorganisms that you have within you mapped, and then you'll have a very personalized program developed that will say, okay, you need to eat more resistant starch because this group of bacteria are low and they do really well on this group of food. So therefore we recommend you eat more of that. And that's what's going to be super exciting about the future of healthcare.
That's amazing. I will touch quickly on the low FODMAP diet because it's something that I'm on at the moment, so it's very close to my heart, but I hadn't heard of it until maybe 6 weeks ago. Could you really quickly explain some of that link between, the SIBO condition and why this low FODMAP diet is part of the solution? I think I'm in that phase where I'm about to go back and introduce foods into my diet, things like garlic and onion, which I already know are the triggers now, one of the many triggers probably. But how can we sort of know that stuff? I mean, how's this diet going to really help us if we're in that state of that early phase SIBO, need to just sort this out, get some good bacteria back on my side and move forward?
So the low FODMAP diet was developed by Monash University here in Australia, and it was developed to support patients who identified as having irritable bowel syndrome. So it's about reducing the dietary sugars in certain foods. And so FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So they're a type of sugar found in certain foods. And some of the foods that are classed as high FODMAP or higher in these sugars are things like avocado, coconut flour, onion, garlic, cauliflower. And so people will often say, oh gosh, I really don't do well when I have something with onion or garlic in it. And so that's a pretty clear sign that you may have an issue with FODMAPs or one of the sugars in it. It doesn't mean you have a problem with all of those sugars. It might be that you just have an issue with polyols, for instance. So the low FODMAP diet can be very beneficial in reducing the symptoms that a person feels. But it is really important to note, this is not a cure. This is like putting a Band-Aid on it. You're not resolving the underlying issue of why your body has stopped absorbing these sugars or processing these sugars well. And what happens is when you eat these foods that are higher in FODMAPs, they are not so well digested by the body. So they're then consumed by the bacteria, particularly if we've got an overgrowth in our small intestine. The bacteria eat it. A byproduct of them eating it is they produce gas. That gas then causes our symptoms. My concern, and many doctors share this concern, is that some people go on a low FODMAP diet for years. And we actually want to be having these foods in our diet that feed the broader microbiome. We don't want to be restricting our microbiome because it's having a knock-on effect. We don't want to restrict it for years and years. So it's a good temporary solution while you're working with a practitioner to uncover why you're having these problems, but it's not something that should be followed for life or for indefinitely. It's not like somebody who is diagnosed with celiac disease, that they have an autoimmune condition which is attacking their intestinal system and therefore they must avoid all forms of gluten for the rest of their life. This is not that diet. So I'd say to anyone who's listening that has started to restrict food, and this is a common symptom or sign that there is something going wrong, if you've started to restrict food on your own, it's important you seek out a nutritionist, a dietitian, a naturopath, or I would look for a functional or holistic general practitioner that has an expertise in gut health, and you want to check that they're working with people around gut health and conditions like SIBO, and working with them to uncover why you've got these problems with food, what's the underlying cause, and what you can do to treat it so that you can get back to eating a full range of foods. Because I've gone from being very restricted in my diet to being able to eat pretty much anything. The only thing I still don't do brilliantly with are lentils, but I can now eat gluten and dairy, but for years I couldn't even touch it. So that's a really nice outcome after treatment.
Absolutely. No, that's always the goal, to get back to eating what we love and not having that restriction forever. I have 2 questions I always wrap up my interviews with, and I'd love you to play with me here as well. Do you have any specific mentors or inspirational people in your life, and what have they taught you about success? They don't have to be famous. They don't have to be people that we would know, but is there anyone that comes to mind? Because I'm always a big believer people don't go on these journeys without having people who are in their corner.
I did a wonderful program a couple of years ago called the Key Person of Influence Business Accelerator Program, which is a 40-week course. And that has been a transformational experience for me, because I now have, so many amazing people that I can talk business with, and I find them highly inspirational when it comes to a business perspective. They inspire me every day with the amazing things they're achieving. But the other people that really inspire me are my clients. I'm dealing with these people that have been dealt often a really tough hand in life, and they are picking themselves up and they're getting on with it, and they inspire me with their courage and their determination and their willingness to keep going even when it feels like there is no tomorrow, and I draw so much strength and inspiration from them.
I bet you do. The last piece of advice, what would be your biggest takeouts for listeners wanting to improve their own well-being in the politics of gut health?
So for me, it's around stopping and really deciding that your health is your number one priority. We only get one shot at this life, as far as we know, for certain, and you are worth it. So think about, I do a bit of an assessment with my clients when they start. We do a full life audit. Where are you spending your time? Is that taking you towards health, or is it taking you away from health? And really investing in really good quality food and nutrition, that is a really important kind of first step in regaining your health. And then the final piece of advice is building a dream team of health professionals that can support you. I have a whole variety of people in my corner now who help me. They each play a specific role in helping me to get well, and I dip in and out of them as I require them, their services. But keep looking for a doctor or various practitioners that can help you. If you meet somebody that says they don't believe you, or what you're experiencing doesn't exist, they're not the right person for you. Keep going. And I'm always really happy for people to connect with me. And, I know many amazing doctors around the world that are working in this field. And I'm always very happy to make introductions to people if they'd like one.
Sounds fantastic. If you do want to connect further with Rebecca Coomes, we have some details on our show notes. You've been listening to The Politics of Everything. Until next time, keep well. Thanks for listening today. If you've enjoyed The Politics of Everything, we thrive on feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network and your friends and family. I'm also always on the hunt for fabulous new guests. So if you've got a view to share and an idea how to get our listeners excited, please email me at amber@bespokecoms, that's bespokecoms.com.au, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Until next time.